personnes qui viennent d'entrer de rapidement prendre place, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi de vous souhaiter à nouveau la bienvenue dans cet hémicycle que vous connaissez bien puisque vous y avez siégé et vous avez fait partie, je le rappelle, de la première délégation georgienne qui a été amenée à siéger dans cet hémicycle. Je dois également rappeler que c'est la 4e visite que vous effectuez à l'Assemblée en tant que chef d'État. Nous y voyons là la preuve de votre considérable engagement personnel en faveur de notre organisation, des valeurs et des principes que nous défendons. En vous adressant à l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe, c'était au mois de janvier 2008, vous avez souligné la vive détermination du peuple de la Géorgie à construire un État stable, fondé sur des institutions démocratiques fortes et non pas sur le pouvoir des personnalités. Les dernières élections législatives, très compétitives et globalement bien organisées, sont une excellente preuve de cette détermination, même si nous sommes tous d'accord qu'il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire pour mettre pleinement en œuvre nos standards en matière d'élections démocratiques. Et vous savez que l'Assemblée parlementaire y attache beaucoup d'importance, le comité des ministres également, et que nous avons l'habitude d'envoyer régulièrement des délégations avec l'OSCE, le dire également, afin de veiller au bon déroulement de ces élections. Le changement de la majorité du Parlement et la cohabitation politique qui s'est installée dans votre pays depuis est un véritable test de maturité des institutions démocratiques de votre pays. Je dois dire d'ailleurs que nous avons beaucoup apprécié que dès la proclamation des résultats, vous n'avez pas cherché à, à contourner la difficulté et vous avez immédiatement donc reconnu la victoire de ceux qui étaient vos opposants. Il appartient maintenant à la classe politique georgienne, représentant la majorité et l'opposition, de faire en sorte que cette cohabitation fonctionne. Alors, je sais que ce n'est pas quelque chose de facile, et j'en parle en connaissance de cause, car vous le savez très bien, nous avons connu cette situation en France. Et vous voyez, nous sommes toujours là, nous en sommes sortis, et je pense que notre démocratie n'en est sortie que renforcée. Mais il y a une règle fondamentale qui est à respecter. La démocratie n'est pas la dictature de la majorité, bien au contraire. C'est un système de partage du pouvoir où chacun doit disposer de mécanismes effectifs qui lui permettent d'exprimer ses positions et de participer au processus de la prise de décision. Monsieur le Président, comme toujours, notre Assemblée est à la disposition du peuple et des autorités georgiennes pour leur apporter le soutien politique et l'expertise. C'est donc avec beaucoup d'intérêt que nous allons vous écouter aujourd'hui afin d'identifier conjointement de nouvelles opportunités de coopération et des initiatives concrètes. Vous le savez, Monsieur le Président, la tradition dans un Parlement, c'est que les parlementaires aient aussi la parole. Ils vont donc vous poser des questions. Ils se sont inscrits nombreux et vous serez amenés, bien évidemment, à leur répondre. Voilà, Monsieur le Président, c'est avec beaucoup de plaisir que je vous donne la parole.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée, Monsieur le Président du Comité des ministres, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, ladies and gentlemen, of course, it was noted that it's the 4th time that I have this tremendous privilege and honor to address this Assembly. I don't attribute it to my personal merits, just to the fact that I've been around for a long time as President, and that's just part of my job description. But also it's an immense honor and privilege to address such a crucial time for Georgian democracy, your Assembly. Allow me first of all to express the deepest gratitude to the President of the Assembly, Jean-Claude Mignon, for inviting me to echo in this room the European and democratic aspirations of my people. As you all know, just 3 months ago, took place the first transfer of power through elections in the history of our nation. Life in every democracy, majorities can change in Georgia according to the wishes of the voters, but our national strive for freedom and European integration goes beyond any political division that is uniting us, consuming the essence of our young state and the identity of our old nation. This is my main message today, and I cannot think of a better place than this Assembly to deliver it. The Council of Europe gathers all the nations of our continent, around the principles and the values that shaped the European destiny since the end of the Second World War. The values and principles that have torn down the Berlin Wall and led European reunification. These values of freedom, human rights, political accountability and the rule of law that the Georgian people are so attached to and that have driven my entire political life. Distinguished members of the Assembly, I remember very well the day I discovered the Council as a young intern coming from what was still called the Soviet Union back in 1991, very soon after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. My first steps in the free world and therefore in real politics, since real politics can only exist in freedom, were made in this very town, in this very place. My first steps in politics and my main steps in life, also I have to say, I remember dividing my time between sleepless nights in the library of the European Court of Human Rights, where I had to prepare my case law for the exam on human rights at the Human Rights Institute, and chasing with a bicycle a beautiful young student from Netherlands who happened to later become my wife and is sitting here smiling. And so it was a very exciting place and special place for me, Strasbourg. Later, I have come back. Everything has changed for me, except my wife. So. Later, I have come here as an MP of independent Georgia with other young reformists for whom this assembly has been an amazing school of democracy. Years after I have been invited here to speak as one of the leaders of the so-called Coral Revolutions that were continuing the movement of emancipation and reunification initiated by the Velvet Revolution of 1989. These were the times of hope and enthusiasm. And now here I am again, standing in front of you as a president of the cohabitation, a leader of a movement that came back to the opposition after more than 8 years in government office. It might surprise you, but after all these years, my hopes and my enthusiasm have only grown. Ladies and gentlemen, from the very beginning, in the early 90s, when Georgia was a failed state, a divided and a brutalized nation, my involvement in politics was inspired by the idea that we would finally join the family of European democracies, the family of nations where governments are changed by ballots and not by ballots. Of course, every politician in the world wants to win elections, and I'm disappointed that the United Nations movement failed to convince a majority of voters in the last October parliamentary elections. But I'm proud that this party, my party, has contributed to build a system in which governments and majorities are changed through elections, not through coups d'etats or revolutions, an institutional framework that facilitates legitimate transfer of powers instead of preventing them, a democracy. For more than 8 years, I have led a team that has radically transformed our nation, fought restlessly against corruption and organized crime, systematically dismantled the bureaucratic hurdles inherited from our Soviet past, liberated the initiatives, the society, and helped to shape the common perception that the government was there to serve the people and not the contrary, that the legitimacy was not coming from the top to the bottom, but the opposite. Many observers have rightly characterized this change of paradigm as a mental revolution. Fatalism, passivity, cynicism, the long-lasting legacy of the Homo Sovieticus has been overcome in Georgia. It means that, like in most of the European nations, alternance has already become the rule, and that no leader, no government, no political or social force, nobody can do anything to reverse this. And this is why my hopes and enthusiasms are stronger than ever. What happened in Georgia in the last 8 years, including in October 1st, a date that stands as an integral part of our democratic experience, has changed our nation and beyond, I deeply believe, our region. Georgia has shown all these years that corruption was not a fate and authoritarianism not a destiny, that the choice was not between chaos and tyranny, as it is too often presented in the post-Soviet world, but between democracy and all other forms of government, whatever you call them. Georgia has proven that there was a radical alternative, a European choice. Ladies and gentlemen, during the past decade, we have paid a huge price for having chosen the path of transformation and Euro-Atlantic integration. Georgia has been threatened, embargoed, bombed, invaded, and occupied. 2 of our regions have been ethnically cleansed. Hundreds of thousands of our citizens have been expelled from their homes, and still cannot go back to their towns and villages. As I'm speaking, this is, my dear friends, the environment in which we have built our democracy, in which our new state has emerged, and our mental revolution has indeed occurred. And I want to tell today how proud I am of the Georgian people, of the sacrifices they have made for our independence, to survive and our democracy to grow and flourish, how much I admire their bravery and their faith in the future, their absence of hatred and their thrust for freedom and peace. I want also to pay tribute to our friends all over Europe. Without their continued support, our democratic experience could not have survived and succeeded. We couldn't have broken away from this prison of stereotypes, of old cliches. I want especially to thank the Assembly for the multiple resolutions passed after 2008 invasion. I want to thank you, distinguished members, and those who are no longer members but present in this room today, such as Matthias Yorshi, who helped us so much during these difficult times. These resolutions, 1633, 1647, and 1683, have been called in very unambiguous terms for the withdrawal of all Russian troops from Georgia, a full access to EU monitoring mission to the occupied territories, the reversal of ethnic cleansing, a new peacekeeping format, an international policing force, the withdrawal of recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as so-called independent states. As you all know, these demands are still to be met. Since these resolutions were passed, Russian military buildup in our occupied regions never stopped. More Georgian villages have been burned and erased from the map by the ethnic cleansers. The UMM has not been allowed in the occupied areas, and the Russian diplomats has been touring the world to bribe and pressure countries to legitimate their illegal occupation. Legitimated. Nevertheless, the formulation of this request by the Assembly has been instrumental. Such signals coming from you deter the aggressors. They show to everyone that principles and values matter. They tell the victims that they are not alone, and they remind the world that is so special about this institution and Europe in general. I know that a resolution on the humanitarian situation in our occupied region is being processed through the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. And I want to thank you in advance for supporting the resolution and all efforts you make to help us overcoming the tragic humanitarian consequences of the invasion, the ethnic cleansing and the occupation. So I came here to express the immense gratitude of the Georgian nation and its hope that your attention and your focus will not decline in front of external threats, as well as support of our internal democratic progress. Georgia needs a strong and efficient Council of Europe and a vivid and relevant parliamentary assembly. Georgia needs it, as well as all our neighboring countries and the European continent in general. This is why I want to express my appreciation and support to the reforms initiated by Secretary General and by the President Mignon. Je tiens à vous féliciter en français, cher Jean-Claude, pour le succès de votre initiative. Il était urgent et nécessaire de mener cette réforme à bien. Je suis convaincu qu'elle donnera à cette Assemblée un rôle et un poids supplémentaires. Les principes et les rêves des pères fondateurs de l'Europe vivent dans cette salle et en Géorgie comme ailleurs. Peut-être plus qu'ailleurs encore. Nous savons l'importance cruciale de votre mission à tous et nous soutenons avec enthousiasme tout ce qui renforcera cette Assemblée et le Conseil. Car les Géorgiens ne sont pas seulement Européens. Nous sommes des Européens enthusiastes. During the last 8 years, you have been accompanying us in our journey of institution building and democratic transformation, advising us, welcoming our progress, as in the latest resolution 1801, proposing changes where you thought we could further improve our practice and our framework. The cooperation we had during these years with the Council and the Assembly and the Venice Commission was, I think, exemplary, constantly helping us to improve our legal framework. Nobody can deny the expertise and goodwill and open attitude of Venice Commission. This is why I call on our new government to wait for recommendations before enforcing laws, especially when it touches the court system and the judiciary. I would like to seize the opportunity of this to address to offer also a special thanks to those of you who have monitored our parliamentary elections. First of all, to the chairman of the delegation, Luca Volante. You have been able to testify that Georgia is getting closer to the standards that this institution is promoting, and that should one day unite all of us in this room. Your vigilance, now that my country has passed what was presented as a litmus test, will be crucial to help ensure that Georgia continues to progress on the same path. Unfortunately, and as most of you know, and as it has happened in many democracies in their early years, the Georgian political class suffers from the winner-takes-all mentality. From the selective prosecutions targeting former government officials, opposition MPs, local authorities, independent media, to direct physical assaults by pro-ruling party activists against opposition representatives or elected local self-governments, a coherent campaign started to silence the political opposition, get constitutional majority in parliament through direct blackmails, pressures, criminal cases against members of parliament and their families, the attempt to seize the entirety of the institutions. The peaceful and constitutional change of government, by showing that institutions did not belong to any party and by opening a period of cohabitation between different elected bodies with diverse political colors, should have been a tremendous opportunity to push further the reforms we had not been able to carry out fully, and especially ensure the independence of judiciary and the media. But instead, we have seen the public linking of wave of arrests by new authorities to political activities of the opposition. We have heard claims that media and that the mission of the new government was to destroy the United Nations movement through judiciary. We have witnessed daily attacks on the judges who are trying to assert their autonomy, and constant harassment of independent media, starting with Georgian public broadcaster. The Georgian public broadcaster was created in order to set up new standards of objectivity in Georgian media landscape, and according to the EU media monitoring mission, the first public channel was the only absolutely balanced TV during last year's electoral campaign. Instead of reinforcing this emergence of an objective public TV, the new government has pushed the director of GPB to resign and now wants to sack the channel, and has announced a plan to merge the Georgia public broadcaster with privately owned channel by the new leaders. Such an initiative would bring us years and years backwards, especially when simultaneously the director of the biggest private channel in Georgia, Rustavi 2, has been detained and now faces court hearings that can bring him many years of prison for charges related to commercial activities of his legal company, and when direct plans were announced to change this ownership of Rustavi 2 through judiciary. It is true that we did not succeed in all our reforms, and that much more needs to be done. But what new government should do, and we wish them the success, they should go further in building our democratic framework and not try to undermine what has been built. It is also true that some reforms were not fully understood by various segments of the population. I agree that our communication to the public was sometimes inefficient, but I do also believe that principles and values are worth taking political risks. The law we passed in 2011, giving equal rights to all religious minorities, might have cost us some votes, but it is a reason to resort to hate speeches and revive the fire of intolerance, for instance, by attacking innocent citizens or releasing with all the honors fanatics who have been convicted for physical assaults against minorities. Is it possible, as well as our decision to remove all the monuments of glory of Soviet tyrants and our constant fight against the communist legacy has displeased certain categories of population, but does it justify the restoration of statues of Stalin, as we are witnessing it in some areas in Georgia, and it's paid by state funds? Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important the new government in Tbilisi says that it wants to pursue the European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Georgia. It is obviously a positive signal, and I have welcomed it publicly several times, offering to help the relevant ministers on this topic as much as I can. It is good to claim it, but claiming it will not be good enough. One has to act accordingly. EU and NATO are not simple partners for Georgia. They are the families we want to join, the transformative goals of our foreign policy, the horizon of our internal reforms. This explains the surprise created by the statements surprise by the statements of the Prime Minister during his recent visit to Armenia, Yerevan. What he said there, that a country can and should have good relations with Russia and NATO at the same time, putting a strange equidistance between both, quoting our Armenian friends as an example. Now, I'm tremendously proud that in my presidency, relations between not only the governments of Georgia and Armenia, but between peoples of Georgia and Armenia have improved dramatically. And it's really exemplary relations right now. And this is very important. I'm very proud of it. But you know, and it's good that after initial attacks, verbal attacks against our regional partners and against our neighbors, the new Georgian government has toned down this rhetoric. But it's important to understand, Georgia has chosen to pursue NATO membership, and Armenia, for its own reasons, did not. This is the sovereign right of every nation to choose the alliances it wants to join or not, but relations and integration are not the same. By what Prime Minister just said a few days ago, unfortunately, changes the whole things we've been saying for all these years. He de facto gave up Georgia's NATO aspiration. That's what it's said, that's what it means after this declaration. I do think that Georgia should integrate NATO and have good relations with Russia at the same time. I was the one who initiated visa-free travel with Russia. I was the one who supported the WTO, World Trade Organization deal with Russia. We abolished visa requirement to Russian citizens unilaterally. Under no government has so many Russian tourists entered Georgia as under last years of my government. I'm very proud of it. Under no government we had so much cultural ties with Russia as the last years and last months of my government. I'm very proud of it. But one thing is to have cultural, economic, trade ties, and this is something we should enhance. The other thing is to change your foreign policy and orientation, which is based on values and fundamental direction of your nations. And I think that's not what Georgian peoples have voted for. And I hope that we can get better explanations and we can help correction of this very alarming declaration. We should not sacrifice the first. We need good relations with neighbors, but we should not sacrifice the first for the second. We should not sacrifice the level of obligation implied by the world integration. It has nothing to do with a simple relation between the two entities. Unfortunately, such statement comes after several national security and foreign policy moves that cast for the first time in a decade doubts on whether the Georgian government actually what they intend to do. Denouncing the Baku-Istanbul railway project, which is a huge geopolitical breakthrough that connects Georgia to Europe, while promoting the railway to Russia through Abkhazia without clearly answering questions on this status, means changing the strategic orientation and basically disconnecting us with European strategic lines. Freeing without investigation people who were convicted for spying for Russia, while putting in jail some of the people who have built our counterintelligence system in cooperation with the West, this raises concerns too. As well as explaining proudly to the Georgian public that the new government has repelled successfully the wave of Western attacks, quote unquote. Such wording reminds us of anti-Western rhetoric of a sovereign democracy, rhetoric that we fought that long ago in our country. We have preserved our enthusiasm for EU and NATO despite the threats, the bombs, the invasion, the occupation that were aiming at obliging us to change our path, and that's not so easy that Georgian people will ever give it up so easily and so lightly. It is the time now that we are closer than ever from our objectives. To show hesitations or to cast doubts on our trajectory? Now, ladies and gentlemen, nothing is irreversible, and there is a room, I'm sure, for a fruitful cohabitation in Georgia. I told you it to the Prime Minister, we need to find a way out of the actual standoff. We would both benefit from it, and we owe it to the Georgian people. I offered a 5-step plan to the majority in order to ensure a peaceful cohabitation and guarantee that we all put the supreme interests of the nation above all, for political rivalries. From the economy, with a joint conference for investors, to the foreign policy, with common initiatives on EU and NATO, we can and should work together. Nobody would gain anything out of a paralysis of our institutions, a pause on Western integration, or a decline of our economy. Nobody has interest in the failure of the new government and the new majority, because this failure would hurt the country in general. This is my solemn pledge. Let us work together to improve what can be improved in our democracy. Let us focus on the principles on which we can agree on, the very principles that are at the basis of the Council of Europe, that all major political forces claim to respect, promote, and defend in Georgia. What is at stake is much more important than our respective political interests, much deeper than our personal rivalries or collective ambitions. What is at stake is the very future of our democracy and beyond, the future of democracy in our region. And it's worth standing up for and fighting for. Thank you.